Great. Hi everyone, my name is Berlyn Hubler and I'm the Tribal Program Coordinator for Grid Alternatives Tribal Program. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to talk about some of our projects on tribal lands, but I'm going to start with a little intro about grid alternatives and also talk a little bit about Indian country, and then we'll discuss some challenges for tribal solar projects, and then move on to energy issues that are driving the need for solar, and then also our approach to these projects, some successes and impacts that we've had, and also look for tribal and solar. Next slide, please. So first, a little bit about GRID. Next slide. We're a solar nonprofit installer. Our vision is a successful transition to clean energy that includes everyone, and our mission is to make renewable energy technology and job training accessible to underserved communities. Next slide, please. So we were started in 2001 by two engineers, Erica Mackey and Tim Sears, and they were installing these large-scale renewable energy projects and energy efficiency projects across the country. And they saw, how the private sector was getting significant savings from these upgrades, and they thought that this would be best used for people who could use the savings the most. So they went back to California and started the nonprofit in 2001. Next slide, please. And they did their first install in 2004. So most of our work focuses on solar installation and also workforce development, and we've also been doing some policy and program development. The majority of our installs are single-family homes for income-qualified families, but we recognize that not everyone owns their own home. So we do a lot of multifamily or installations on apartment complexes, and also do some community solar projects, most of it in Colorado, with some utilities, so that families can get a credit on their utility bill, so it's not necessarily on their home. The second thing we do, workforce development. Grid Alternatives is known for the classroom on the roof. Anyone can come and install with us and learn about solar. You just have to go through a mandatory orientation and be at least 16 years old. The third thing we do is policy recommendations. We do a lot of this for increasing opportunities for low-income solar. So since we began in 2001, and since our first install in 2004, we've installed for over 1,600 families annually, and we've been promoting a lot of workforce diversity in the solar industry. We've connected over 350 trainees to jobs since 2015, and we've been doing a lot of state and federal policy advocacy and also scaling our work nationally through new partnerships. Next slide, please. So the majority of our work is done in California. We have 7 offices there. But we also have offices now in Colorado, New York City, Washington, D.C. We also have our National Tribal Program, which began in 2015, and we're based in the Colorado office. And we also have an international program that also has an office in Nicaragua, and they've been doing installs in Nepal lately. Since we started, we've installed over 8,500 systems. So this is 8,500 families that now are seeing savings on their electricity bill as a benefit from solar. And we've also trained over 32,000 people. And this is a lot of savings and emissions avoided. Next slide, please. For tribal work specifically, we have worked with 43 tribes across the U.S. The majority of our work is in California with 32 tribes and 11 across the rest of the U.S. Our tribal program's primary focus is regions where we don't currently have offices, mainly the Southwest and Great Plains regions. And we also support the regional offices with various aspects of their tribal work. Next slide. So a little bit about Indian country. There are 567 federally recognized tribes in the U.S. The total population of American Indian Alaska Natives is 5.2 million, and this is about 1.7% of the U.S. population. The Native American population is growing, and a lot of it is young. 42% of the population is under the age of 24. The way tribal works is it's a government-to-government relationship with the United States. They're self-governed and have a political relationship. They're culturally unique and have their own governing structures, so they have their own languages, beliefs, but they're also responsible for their own laws and infrastructure. And they have a significant amount of natural resources, a lot of fossil fuels, but renewables as well. And this here is just a map of the land across the U.S. and how it's changed over the years. So next slide. So this map comes from NREL, and it's the renewable energy resources for utility scale PV generation potential. And you can see this is all tribal lands. American Indian land comprises approximately 2% of U.S. land, but it contains an estimated of 5% of all renewable energy resources. So there's a lot of potential for solar on tribal lands. Next slide, please. But still, there's a lot of challenges to doing these solar projects. The upside is that most of them can be solved with solar implementation. It's just that it's so new. The first thing is that the majority of financing that's pushing solar development, such as the ITC or investment tax credit, is largely unavailable to tribes. And then for them, energy projects are often not their priority. They have more immediate needs like clean water, sufficient housing. They have unemployment issues and also waste management. And there are also unique laws that apply to tribal lands, such as required environmental and cultural assessments, especially if you're doing work on the ground. A lot of this stuff came up recently with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe when, with the Dakota Access Pipeline, a lot of conflict about obtaining the necessary permits and doing the necessary cultural assessments. Other times the government structure requires special approvals, and this kind of is like a different permitting process, much like you would see regular PV, but it has to go through the tribal government. And the housing stock is also a challenge. In these areas, the houses are not always energy efficient or weatherized, and if you want to do solar, it won't be as beneficial and you won't see as much cost savings if the house isn't efficient to begin with. Sometimes there's also issues with the way the structure is. It might be a cultural type of housing where the rafters are difficult to locate, so maybe there's no attic and there's no building plans available, so you don't know if it can structurally hold the solar on the roof. Another thing is that the solar market is not developed in the area, so a lot of the projects that we're doing are some of the first solar PV projects in these areas, and this has a steep learning curve. Local electricians are unfamiliar, and there's also, you're setting a precedence with the tribe. And then as a result of that, there's also a lack of capacity and funding for operations and maintenance. Luckily, solar is considered low maintenance, but it's always nice to have people in the community who know and understand the technology. Lack of education is sometimes a challenge too, because the tribes are not always familiar with how solar works, or sometimes they can get it confused with other solar technology like solar heating or solar water heaters. And they also don't necessarily understand the importance of weatherization, or have struggled with, keeping ahead of that type of thing. And then there's also sometimes issues with net metering and utility policies being unfavorable in some of the regions. In South Dakota, the Rosebud Sioux get their electricity from Cherry Todd. Cherry Todd's primary customer base is ranchers and farming, so they have this unusual rate structure that favors energy consumption. So the more energy you consume, the cheaper your electricity is. And this is opposite of most regions. And then lastly, there's a significant amount of turnover in these communities, whether it's the tribal government structure or pressure of the job. A lot of times our contacts in the communities change from year to year. So a lot of the solar knowledge that's developed with initial projects gets lost between years. Next slide, please. So considering these challenges, there's also still, a lot of potential for solar to be a solution to several energy issues that are also present in these regions. energy should be working for the tribes and raising the standard of living. Instead, a lot of these regions are experiencing impacts from the fossil fuel industry. And there's also a disproportionate energy burden. So energy burden is a term used to describe the percentage of monthly income dedicated to the cost of energy. In some regions where we work, the energy cost can be as high as a mortgage payment, or about 30% of monthly household income. And for us, we see this as more of a cycle of energy dysfunction, especially in regions with harsh climates. There's leaky homes and all electric heating, and the households cannot keep up with the high cost of electric heating, considering that the house is poorly insulated. So the tribe ends up covering the cost of the electricity, or anecdotally, some cases where the electricity is shut off and the family moves out of the house but doesn't notify the tribe, and the pipes will freeze and burst and cause a lot of damage to the home. And then not only is the tribe left to repair and refurbish the house, but this is spent on paying outside contractors, and then there are extra fees owed to the utility to turn the electricity back on. And this money ends up leaving the reservation and doesn't come back to the community. So we see solar as a solution here, and also weatherization. So they can invest in weatherization and renewables so they can break this short-term paycheck to paycheck or Band-Aid mindset. Next slide. And the Navajo Nation is one example of a tribe that has been impacted by the fossil fuel industry. It's about the size of West Virginia and spans 3 states, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. Their population is about 300,000. It's a very vast landscape. As of 2004, 18,000 of the 48,000 households did not have access to the electricity grid. Because of this, a lot of Navajo have off-grid systems, or think of only off-grid when they think of solar. They also have a lot of natural resources, except they have limited access to running water, and they have a great solar resource. Next slide. So despite the fact that they have a ton of resources, there's a lot of negative externalities. There's a lot of uranium mining that happened on Navajo. The coal industry has been a major source of has been a major economic resource for them, and more recently has been fracking from natural gas mining. Next slide, please. So for uranium mining, from 1944 to 1986, nearly 30 million tons of uranium ore were extracted from Navajo lands under leases with the Navajo Nation. This was outlawed in 1986, and now there are over 500 abandoned uranium mines on Navajo Nation. And there's already limited access to water, but abandoned mines have contaminated a lot of wells, making it even more difficult to access this water. So this here is a map of the Navajo Nation, and you can see all the red dots are abandoned uranium mines. The tricky thing here is it looks a lot like the desert, so if you're wandering out there, you might not know unless you see a sign. Next slide, please. And then if you're visiting, you'll see a lot of signs up in the chapter houses indicating which wells not to drink from because they're unsafe. Next slide. So in addition to the uranium mining, there are 7 coal-fired power plants and 4 coal mines on the reservation or nearby. And this is pretty controversial. It's kind of like Appalachia. A lot of Navajo jobs are from the coal mines, and they have agreements with the coal mines too, so it finances a lot of the Navajo Nation's income. And specifically, the Peabody coal mine, they've been pumping water from the Navajo aquifer to transport coal to the Navajo generating station, which is, it's in Arizona, but it primarily feeds energy to Las Vegas and Southern California, Phoenix, and Albuquerque major metropolitan areas. Like I said before, a lot of the Navajo Nation doesn't have access to the electricity grid. And the issue with this was that the Peabody coal mine was pumping water from the Navajo aquifer, draining the aquifer to transport a lot of the coal to feed the Navajo generating station. And on top of this, they have similar ozone levels to Denver, Colorado. And ozone, as we know, is typically a result of heavy traffic and power plants. But if you've ever been to the Navajo Nation, there are barely roads, so it has to be a result of the fossil fuel industry. Next slide. So recently on Navajo, there's been a lot of fracking, so much so that a methane cloud has formed. It's about 2,500 square miles, and it was first detected by NASA in 2003 and confirmed in October 2014, and is said to be the largest concentration of atmospheric methane in the U.S. and is more than triple a standard ground-based estimate. Next slide. So we see solar as a solution to these environmental issues and also a way forward for economic development. Design Build Bluff is the architecture school at the University of Utah, and their students design and build houses suitable for Navajo families each year. Next slide. In this case, the home is highly efficient and is culturally appropriate. The students have studied the local culture and used local materials to build a home that can accommodate family gatherings of various sizes. And then Grid came in and we did solar PV on top of this house. Next slide. And the way we size our systems is we usually design them to meet 75% of an annual household electricity usage. But since no one lived in this home, the array was modestly sized using a rule of thumb. And the residents of this home, since living there, have only been paying for their electricity service. So they've been paying the base charge. Because the home is weatherized and efficient, the solar is already meeting more than they need. Unfortunately, recently the utility co-op in this area was acquired by NTUA, which is the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, and it's the utility that serves the majority of the Navajo Nation. And they don't have a favorable net metering policy. For whatever reason, they're against distributed generation. The way that their policy works is the solar must be used as it's produced. So it's likely that this client's bill will go up, but we're hopeful that NTUA comes around to embrace solar as the coal industry is struggling in the region. Next slide. Solar has significant potential, especially in regions like the Southwest, and our approach is comprehensive, and we see it as a sustainable economic strategy that honors tribal culture, people, values, and interests. Next slide. So our approach is simple. We want to see tribes achieve energy sovereignty. We want them to be able to think long-term financially and provide good, clean energy jobs for their members, but we have to do this through projects. And projects are how we demonstrate the potential of solar and also the means for which we educate the tribes at various levels. So next slide. Energy sovereignty. Tribes have a long history of being exploited for their energy resources, often with little in return. They're looking to develop their own energy resources as a means to provide revenue and also jobs to raise the standard of living on their reservation. With energy sovereignty also comes reduced energy burden and breaking that cycle of energy dysfunction. Money can be circulated and recirculated throughout the community, especially if they're developing their own solar projects, installing the projects themselves, and also serving the people in the community that can use the savings the most. So rather than the tribe spending millions of dollars paying utility bills for families that can't keep up with the energy burden, they can invest in projects that eventually generate a profit. Next slide, please. So without projects, this energy sovereignty is difficult to realize. So we partner with the tribes on solar PV installations to help fulfill their goals and also provide an introduction to the technology. We use these projects to demonstrate a cost savings to the tribe, but also give hands-on training so that the members are familiar with some of the operations and maintenance that's needed. And it also highlights the viability of solar, showing it's possible to do solar in places with snow like Montana or South Dakota that may not be as sunny as New Mexico. Through our projects, we've partnered with housing authorities and tribal colleges, and this helps get buy-in from people who would have an interest in a construction career or solar development. One thing that I love about this slide is it shows the adaptability of solar. We have off-grid system, we have a flat roof tilt racking, we have a ground mount. Solar is really adaptable, so we can put it anywhere and do it any way to meet the needs of the tribal community. Next slide. So our projects provide many opportunities to educate the community. We typically give an orientation to the client and anyone attending an installation. So this would be anyone who is coming out for training or just wants to volunteer, or even the client themselves. And the orientations usually revolve around things like energy use, the importance of weatherization, energy efficiency and conservation, but also include an overview of how solar works. We also educate our clients on opportunities that they may have to apply for a weatherization program if their house isn't already weatherized. We try to install as much as we can on homes that are already efficient. Trainees and community volunteers get a lot of hands-on experience installing solar, and this provides things like transferable skills, safety protocols, how to use tools, different things that can be used in other construction industries, or if they're trying to become an electrician. And it also introduces solar as a potential career path. A lot of the solar core that we have now have come and installed with us and volunteered, and then decided that they really wanted to pursue solar as a career. We have this AmeriCorps program at GRID, and we've termed it Solar Core because we have so many different funding streams for it. But we've been recruiting a lot of tribal members to come work in GRID offices, and this has been one of the most effective ways to get tribal members interested in solar, because we can bring them to the solar rather than bring the solar to them. And they get a year's worth of intensive solar installation and get a lot of project experience. And then once they spend a lot of time with GRID and learn as much as they can about solar, they can return to their tribes and take that knowledge and experience with them. We also spend a lot of time with our tribal partners talking about different weatherization things that they can do, and trying to come up with unique funding strategies. A lot of tribes take advantage of this low-income home energy assistance program, LIHEAP, and especially one of our partners, they get about $1 million from the state to pay utility bills for low-income families or anyone who's having trouble paying their electricity bill. But then they put up $2 million of their own money towards this. And what they could be doing is also spending that money on things like weatherization and energy efficiency, especially for some of the people who are costing them a lot of money. And this would be a way for them to invest back into their community rather than just paying the money to the utility. So these are some of the things that we work with with our tribal partners. Next slide. So a sample timeline for some of the projects and the way we do our approach is shown here. Since we started in 2015, a lot of our stuff is only in the demonstration stage and maybe the intermediate stage. In year one, we typically do a demonstration project, typically on a single family home, and we'll do the client and workforce and tribal education and work to understand the tribe's goals and potential funding opportunities. Then we spend the next few years working to develop projects that get them to their goals and also expand education to classrooms and begin to develop some unique funding strategies like third-party financing. And in the long term, we focus on building up a crew of installers, securing funds for multi-year project development that meets the tribe's goals for energy. Next slide. So since we began, we've had several successes. The first is Tecamook Energy. The Mesa Grande tribe in Southern California recruited a bunch of people to come and get experience with grid alternatives, and they gained enough solar experience that they were able to form their own installation crew, which is Tecamook Energy. And now they're starting to be a subcontractor for some of the projects that we have there. Another success is that we've built a lot of strong partnerships with tribes, and initially we were approaching tribes who we thought would be good partners. But since then, almost all the tribes come to us and ask us for help with their solar projects. And then recently, we've been able to find some unique financing approaches that we think will really make the solar industry boom for these tribal lands. Also, our clients are seeing significant savings on their utility bills, and we're continuing to install about 100 projects each year on tribal land. So far, we've recruited 9 Native American Solar Corps, and 2 of them have been promoted to solar installation supervisors. Next slide. Overall, for our impact, we've installed 533 systems on tribal lands. So this is 533 tribal families who are now getting that energy savings. We've trained 423 Native Americans. 91 of them are women, 22 vets, and 24 of them have received jobs based on their experience with grid alternatives. Next slide. So the future for tribal solar is bright. Tribes are interested in solar as an economic development strategy, and they're incorporating it in their strategic energy plans. It also resonates culturally and provides a means to maintain sovereignty. It's also a great option because it's low maintenance and has few moving parts. And there's also a large workforce available in these regions that are looking for jobs as well as abundant renewable resources. All right, next slide. So thank you guys. That's all I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Berlyn. So if you missed it at the beginning, Berlyn wasn't able to see the presentation window. So if you type anything in, I will speak the questions out to her. Okay, so Berlyn, we have our first question from Dana Harmon. Dana asked, can you please talk a bit more about the unique funding opportunities outside of using LIHEAP and utility funds?
Sure. So the main promising funding opportunity we have is we've been working with a law firm, and they've been partnering with a third-party investor to do some solar projects on other tribal lands. And both of them were really impressed with what we do, and they're willing to work with us. And they're already working with several tribes, and we're willing to introduce us with them as well. I think what tribes are most interested in us for is the workforce development, that we're willing to come in and do training for free in addition to installing the solar. So what happens is when we use a third-party investor, they're able to take advantage of that income tax credit that tribes can't take advantage of. So after 11 years, or whenever the system produces enough, there's a flip, and the ownership will go from the third-party investor to the tribe. So that's the main one that we have now. Other than that, it's still, not that promising. But being able to take advantage of the income tax credit is huge.
So Dana said thank you, and that she would follow up with you directly with some other items to discuss. There was another question, this one from Anthony, and Anthony was curious about whether or not you all had any partnerships with universities in Colorado, I think such as Colorado State, and what opportunities to collaborate with other tribal lands that there were.
So since we're focused more on places where we don't have grid offices, we do have an office here in Denver, Colorado. So anything that's happening in Colorado is really under them. So you can definitely reach out to the Colorado office. sign up to do the orientation and volunteer with them. But we also have a solar spring break program at Grid, so colleges can pay for a trip, and then during spring break they'll spend a week at one of our offices doing installing and learning about solar, and doing all kinds of different things. So there's that opportunity as well. As far as new tribal partnerships and opportunities, I think for now we're not really looking to make new partnerships unless the tribe has a lot of resources that they can bring. We have a lot of stuff coming up, and we're working with a lot of tribes already, and we're actually really small staff. There's only 3 of us who are here full time. But if he has, any leads, go ahead and send those over.
He said thanks, and he'll look into this information online. That they sound like great opportunities. One other question. This one from Chris. Chris was wondering if Grid Alternatives would go after crowdfunding or other donor money opportunities like that.
So we certainly have done this in the past, and I think usually around holiday time. And sure enough, anyone can donate to us at any time through our website. We are funded through a lot of different streams, not just state and local incentives or different financing options. We also get grants and work with foundations. We have a lot of individual donors, things like that. So certainly crowdfunding is something we do all the time.
Okay, great. At the moment, it looks like there are not any other questions. We'll give folks just another minute or less just to come up with something.
So while you're still there, I'm still thinking about this crowdfunding question. One thing I think more towards the tribal program specifically, we're not opposed to accepting donations, but a lot of what we do is not really about trying to get as much money to fund these projects as possible. We want to see more of a sustainable solution or a sustainable way to fund the projects so that, after Grid Alternatives, the tribe can take over and be able to meet their energy needs on their own without the help of us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Chris had another question, and I think the answer to this might be both, but he was curious about the systems that you all help install, if they were rooftop and ground mounted or only ground mounted.
We do both actually. Sometimes roofs aren't always suitable for solar. Either the house is facing the wrong direction, it's not oriented south, or sometimes the roof is just in a poor condition and it's a bad idea to just put solar on there. The times that we run into some problems are when the roof condition is bad and there's also not, room for a ground mount nearby or space, or, if we had to do an environmental assessment and it turns out that there were, you know, artifacts or something on the land or it had significance, things like that. So yeah, we definitely do both.
Okay, great. Well, Chris said thank you, as have a number of other folks. So I'll chime in and thank you as well. Uh, I think that that's the last of our questions. So um, again, thank you very much, Berlyn, for your talk. We'll be sharing this on YouTube, so feel free to share it yourself as well. There was one question earlier regarding the slides. Uh, would you mind if we put them up, or as a PDF, or what is what's your preference in that regard?
Um, it doesn't matter. Either way is fine, I think.
Okay, well, I can probably put a PDF up, or I believe Chris, if you would like, you can get in touch with us, or Berlin's email is there, and she could probably share them with you as well. Uh, so, thank you again, Berlin, for taking the time to speak with
Thank
us,
you.
and please, for those of you joining us, continue to do so. This is an ongoing series, and we'd love to see you again in the future. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks.